For decades, the Philippines has defended one of the world's most complex archipelagic airspaces with aircraft designed more for patrol than for combat. That reality is now being challenged. As regional air activity intensifies and encounters in the West Philippine Sea become more frequent, Manila has reached a strategic inflection point. Air sovereignty can no longer rely on light jets and goodwill alone. It requires credible, modern air combat power. This is the context behind the Philippines' request to South Korea for the delivery of KF-21 Boracay multi-role fighters between 2027 and 2029. The move signals more than a procurement timeline. It reflects a shift in mindset. The Philippine Air Force is transitioning from a primarily internal security orientation toward external defense, deterrence, and alliance-ready operations in a contested Indo-Pacific environment. Advanced multi-role fighters sit at the center of this transformation. They are essential for enforcing control of national airspace, supporting maritime strike and interdiction across vast sea lanes, and integrating seamlessly with allied air and naval forces. In a region where air power increasingly shapes outcomes at sea, fighters are no longer optional, they are foundational. Developed by Korea Aerospace Industries, the KF-21 Boracay represents a new class of capability for the Philippines. As a 4.5 generation fighter, it blends modern sensors, network-centric warfare features, and multi-role flexibility at a cost point more accessible than 5th-generation platforms. For Manila, the appeal is straightforward. A jet powerful enough to deter, modern enough to integrate, and practical enough to sustain. If delivered within the requested window, the KF-21 would not simply replace older aircraft. It would redefine what Philippine air power can do, how far it can reach, and how seriously it is taken in an increasingly crowded sky. For much of its modern history, the Philippine Air Force has operated with a limited air combat capability, shaped largely by internal security missions rather than high-end external defense. The acquisition of the FA-50PH Fighting Eagle from South Korea, with deliveries beginning in 2015, marked an important turning point. The FA-50 restored supersonic flight, improved pilot training, and provided a reliable platform for air policing and light strike roles. It gave the PAF a credible starting point after years without true fighter aircraft. Yet as regional air activity intensified, the limits of that platform became increasingly clear. The FA-50 lacks the range, payload, endurance, and advanced sensor suite needed for sustained multi-role operations across the Philippines' vast maritime domain. In scenarios involving long-distance patrols, layered air defense, or encounters with more sophisticated aircraft, these constraints directly reduce operational flexibility. What once sufficed for peacetime patrols is no longer enough for deterrence in a contested air environment. South Korea confronted a similar challenge with its own aging fighter fleet, and the result was the KF-21 Boracay. Designed to replace F-4 and F-5 aircraft, the program was also a strategic effort to establish an indigenous, next-generation fighter capability led by Korea Aerospace Industries. Serial production began in 2024, with the first 40 Block 1 aircraft scheduled for delivery between 2026 and 2028. Technologically, the KF-21 represents a clear leap beyond legacy systems. Its indigenous AESA radar and modern avionics allow long-range target detection, simultaneous tracking of multiple contacts, and integration into network-centric operations. For the Philippines, this matters because air combat today is no longer about isolated aircraft. It is about sensors, data, and coordination. In that context, the KF-21 is not simply a newer jet. It is a gateway to a more credible, survivable, and alliance-compatible Air Force posture. The request itself is tightly calibrated to the Philippines' long-term defense planning. According to officials from Korea Aerospace Industries, Manila has formally asked for delivery of KF-21 Boracay fighters between 2027 and 2029, with a contract expected to be finalized in 2026. This schedule is not arbitrary. It aligns directly with the Philippine Air Force's Horizon 3 modernization phase, which marks the shift from internal security toward external defense and credible air combat capability. Strategically, the rationale is straightforward. Light combat aircraft can no longer close the capability gap created by longer ranges, faster reaction times, and increasingly networked air and missile threats in the region. Advanced fighters are needed to sustain air superiority, extend maritime strike reach across the archipelago, and operate effectively alongside allied forces in joint and combined missions. In deterrence terms, capability matters as much as intent. A multi-role fighter signals that airspace control is enforceable, not symbolic. This logic sits squarely within Horizon 3's priorities, which explicitly focus on defending the country's maritime approaches and countering coercive tactics short of open conflict. The KF-21's range, sensors, and interoperability make it a natural fit for that mission set. In effect, the delivery request is less about acquiring a new aircraft and more about timing a structural upgrade, ensuring that by the late 2020s, Philippine air power is aligned with the realities of its security environment rather than the assumptions of the past. From a technical and operational standpoint, the KF-21 Borame represents a clear step into high-end air combat without crossing into the cost and complexity of fifth-generation platforms. As a 4.5 generation twin-engine multi-role fighter, it combines semi-stealth shaping with an indigenous AESA radar, advanced sensor fusion, and a modern electronic warfare suite. These systems dramatically improve situational awareness, target detection, and survivability, critical advantages in contested airspace where seeing first often determines who controls the engagement. In performance terms, the KF-21 is well matched to the Philippines' geography. With a top speed exceeding Mach 1.8, a combat radius of roughly 1,000 kilometers, and a payload capacity of about 7,700 kilograms across 10 hardpoints, the aircraft is capable of sustained air defense, long-range maritime patrols, and both air-to-air and air-to-ground missions. This range payload combination matters for an archipelagic state, where fighters must cover wide sea gaps, respond quickly to incursions, and remain on station long enough to matter. Compared with the FA-50PH Fighting Eagle, the KF-21 offers a qualitative leap rather than an incremental upgrade. It flies farther, carries more weapons, processes vastly more sensor data, and integrates more smoothly into allied command and control networks. For Philippine planners, this balance is key. The KF-21 is advanced enough to deliver real deterrence and interoperability, yet structured to remain fiscally and operationally manageable. In short, it is viewed not as an aspirational prestige platform, but as a practical cornerstone for a more credible and modern Philippine air power posture. The request carries clear strategic weight in a region where airspace is becoming as contested as the sea below it. For Manila, the move reflects growing concern over aerial shadowing, maritime coercion, and gray zone pressure in the South China Sea, where control is often tested incrementally rather than through open conflict. Advanced multi-role fighters provide more than combat power. They create uncertainty for potential challengers. The ability to detect earlier, respond faster, and operate farther from home bases turns air sovereignty from a legal claim into an enforceable reality. In deterrence terms, the message is simple. Airspace violations will no longer be met with symbolic patrols alone. At the same time, a KF-21 Borame acquisition would significantly deepen defense ties between the Philippines and South Korea, moving the relationship beyond training jets into frontline combat capability. Building on the FA-50 partnership, the deal would mark one of Seoul's first major fighter exports and signal its emergence as a serious global defense supplier. For Manila, this diversifies its security partnerships while accessing advanced technology from a like-minded middle power. For Seoul, it demonstrates that Korean systems are not only domestically credible, but operationally trusted by partners facing real-world security pressure. From a procurement standpoint, the KF-21 discussion has already moved beyond exploratory interest into structured engagement. Philippine defense officials and Korea aerospace industries are now working through timelines, delivery slots, and contractual sequencing, with the expectation that a memorandum of understanding or framework agreement could be signed in 2026. This sequencing is deliberate. It allows Manila to align financing approvals, pilot training pipelines, basing upgrades, and sustainment planning before the first aircraft arrive, rather than treating delivery as an isolated transaction. If finalized on schedule, initial handovers beginning in 2027 would dovetail with the Philippine Air Force's Horizon 3 transition period, when legacy capability gaps are expected to be closed. Cost considerations are central to why the KF-21 remains attractive. With an estimated unit cost of roughly $65–80 million, The aircraft sits below or on par with established Western multi-role fighters, such as the F-16 Fighting Falcon or the Saab JAS-39 Gripen, while offering a newer design architecture and a modern avionics baseline. For a country balancing defense modernization against fiscal constraints, this pricing band matters. It allows acquisition of credible air combat capability without the long-term sustainment burden associated with heavier fifth-generation platforms. Production capacity and scheduling also factor into the equation. Serial production of the KF-21 Boramae began in 2024, with South Korea prioritizing its own Air Force requirements through the late 2020s. The Philippines' requested 2027 to 2029 delivery window fits realistically within export availability without displacing domestic commitments. From KAI's perspective, an export customer during this phase helps stabilize production runs, reduce unit costs over time, and validate the aircraft in international service. Equally important is integration risk, or rather, the relative lack of it. The Philippine Air Force already operates South Korean aircraft, has trained pilots and maintainers within Korean systems, and maintains existing logistics and support relationships developed through FA-50 operations. This continuity lowers barriers in spare parts management, technical documentation, training philosophy, and long-term sustainment planning. Instead of building an entirely new support ecosystem, the PAF would be expanding one that is already proven in service. These procurement and industrial factors explain why the KF-21 is being treated not as a speculative option, but as a structurally viable acquisition. The combination of manageable cost, realistic production timelines, and reduced integration risk positions the program as a modernization effort that can be executed incrementally and sustainably, an essential consideration for an Air Force upgrading under real-world budget, manpower, and infrastructure constraints, rather than idealized planning assumptions. As with any major capability leap, the KF-21 acquisition comes with inherent risks that Philippine planners are openly weighing. As a relatively new platform entering serial production, the KF-21 Boramae will face early integration and initial operational challenges, particularly as systems mature and tactics are refined. Standing up pilot training pipelines, maintenance crews, and logistics support also requires time and institutional adjustment. These are not abstract concerns, but they are familiar ones. The Philippine Air Force accepted comparable risks during its earlier FA-50 acquisition, and that experience now provides a tested foundation rather than a leap into the unknown. Fiscal considerations may ultimately prove more decisive than technical ones. Advanced fighters demand sustained, multi-year budget commitments that extend far beyond the initial purchase. Manila must balance this investment against other defense priorities: naval modernization, ground-based air defense, and maritime domain awareness, while ensuring funding for long-term sustainment, spare parts, and upgrades. The challenge is not simply buying the aircraft, but committing to keep them operational and relevant over decades. How effectively the Philippines manages this balance will determine whether the KF-21 becomes a transformative capability or a constrained one. The Philippines' request for KF-21 Boramae deliveries between 2027 and 2029 marks a decisive turning point in its air power modernization. It signals a move away from symbolic air policing toward credible deterrence, sustained air sovereignty, and meaningful participation in regional security architectures. More than a platform choice, the decision reflects a strategic commitment to long-term capability building and deeper defense partnerships, particularly with South Korea. While negotiations, funding decisions, and delivery execution will determine the pace and scale of the program, the direction is clear. If realized, the KF-21 will shape the Philippine Air Force's air defense posture well into the next decade, closing long-standing capability gaps and anchoring a more resilient, credible, and regionally relevant air power strategy in an increasingly contested Indo-Pacific environment. If you found this analysis valuable, share your perspective in the comments. Your insights help deepen the conversation and sharpen our understanding of evolving regional dynamics. Thank you, and we will see you soon in our next geopolitical discussions.